Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Wine, Women, and Words. And joining us tonight is Michelle.
Hello.
And we have our wonderful special guest who is officially the first in our 5-author club. Greer Macallister is here to talk to us about her book, Arca. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's good to be here. It's good to be in a club of one.
Yes, you're like the initiate in it, and we're going to actually have to put up or shut up, and the next episode is going to be at your place.
Here we go.
I know that's for your next book. We'll have to plan to come up to Boston and record there.
There we go.
And the next book, I'm assuming because it's a trilogy, and we're going to get into that in a moment. Then we're not going to give away any spoilers. But the next book, I'm assuming, is going to be what, 2 years?
1 year. It's
1 year.
Out in April. Yeah.
Michelle,
We have a year to plan. Well, that's drivable for me, right? I mean, I've driven from Chicago to North Carolina, and that's like a 14-hour drive. So I feel like I could drive from Florida to Massachusetts.
Florida to Boston, it's most of the whole coast, right? So it'd be a while. It might be a couple of days or one really long day.
Yeah, I remember driving. I would drive from Chicago to see my mom in North Carolina, and it would just be the kids and me, and I wouldn't want to stop overnight anywhere. So I would leave at like 4 o'clock in the morning and get there at like 6 or 7, like once you factor in, like bathroom breaks and lunch breaks and I'm losing my mind breaks and the time difference, because then you lose an hour crossing over to the East Coast. And I would just feel like so weird. I would feel like almost on like a high by the time I got there. Like I would be like numb from like the waist down. Don't recommend it. It's not a good time, but I can do it.
And I've got aunts who are
my turn to drop things.
Yes, it is your turn to drop things. I have aunts in Cape Cod, or on Cape Cod, I should say. And they are already like, so when you're going to come back out and visit? So I feel like this is going to be double duty where I come and we do the show with you. We have so many author friends in Boston. I feel like it's going to be like this whole like podcast.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh, is the author road trip finally going to happen? You can just fly to Florida and drive up with me.
I could do that. I could be your buddy.
You could be my buddy. You are my buddy. Anyway, we are here to talk about an actual book, even though we could just hang out and chat all night. But so Arca is book 2 in the 5 Queendoms. So for the first book was Scorpica, which of course we had you on the show last year for. But for people who may not yet be familiar with Arca, can you give us an overview of what this book is about?
Yeah. So the first book, for people who are completely unfamiliar, the whole series is sort of a feminist Game of Thrones matriarchal world, not a utopia, not a dystopia, just a women are in charge because they always have been. And surprise, some of them are just as terrible as anybody who's ever been in power of anywhere. The first book concerned what they called the drought of girls, where there were no girls born for a generation. As the second book starts, that particular emergency is over, but it has a lot of long range implications that people from all 5 queendoms are dealing with over the course of the couple of years that Arca is set in. So we have a queen, we have a new queen who is completely unready to deal with all the stuff that's going on. We have troops amassing on a border. We have a queen who has no female descendants and wants her son to be the first king of her country. And there are a lot of people who don't like that idea. So there's a lot of intrigue, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of stuff brewing across the Five Queendoms.
I absolutely love this story and this take. And I have to ask, going from historical fiction to this fantasy world, is there like this liberating feeling about it, or is it let's talk about that for a moment, because I'm sure we probably talked about it before, but I want to delve into that again.
It's always new. And for people who haven't heard us talk about it, it's new. So yes, when I started writing fantasy, I'm like, this is awesome. Like, having written 4 works of historical fiction before that, and as well as anybody, you're going to get emails about like, oh, this particular model of gun was not available in this particular location in this particular year, or, people will quibble with the historical record down to what one of my old bosses used to call the gnat's eyelash. And that is just part and parcel of being a historical fiction author, is people are going to dispute your facts. And with fantasy, you get to make up the facts. So people can dispute them if they want, but you could also say, look, I made it up. Like, I say that blade is a scorpion-shaped blade, and you're not going to tell me I'm wrong. So it was very freeing to be able to make that stuff up. Now, as I get into the second and third books of the trilogy, now I've sort of become a prisoner of the stuff that I made up. So it's less freeing. So now I'm sort of like, historical fiction would be kind of cool, where I can just go back and there's a record that I could point to and follow that. So it's interesting how it's sort of looped around in that time.
So now are you like, damn it, past Greer, why did I do that? Why did I write it that way?
I have had some words with past Greer about like tying me down to certain timelines, or if I had only planted a seed, I wish I had planted certain seeds 2 books ago. But you can't do everything, and you can't, I'm a writer who sort of discovers stuff as I write. So I did outline and plot all 3 books, but I'm changing stuff in the 3rd book. And so I have to make sure that there's nothing in the 1st or 2nd book that contradicts what I want to make up.
So is there a certain degree of research, as in going back to for Arca, for what you're working on now, and then for Scorpica while you are working on Arca, to refresh and remember and go, okay, that's, this is what I created, these are the rules, this is what we're doing, to be able to write and move forward?
Yeah, there's a lot of cross-referencing. There's a lot of going back and reading sort of, where did I leave off with this? And then I also make mistakes. Like, there's stuff that my copy editors caught in book 2. They're like, well, actually, judging by what you said on page X in book 1, this character would be, 7 years old, not 6 years old at this point in the book. I'm like, great, thank you for telling me. I will fix it. So that was like during copy edits of book 2. And she said, well, you said this. And I'm like, oh, great. I'm so glad you noticed, because I did not notice when I was, and I go over it and I go over it and I go over it. But just, you can't always see your own stuff clearly. And thank goodness for copy editors is my point there.
Copy editors, they are the unsung heroes and the necessary evil for every book that we write.
Yes.
Copy editing, I would love to pick a copy editor's brain when they approach editing a series, like a trilogy or a series of books, because that's do you have notes to remember everything, or do they just like find a fact and go back to the first book and fact check? That's a lot of attention to detail. That's
or
impressive.
Is it the same copy editor throughout the whole process? That would be my question.
In my case, it has been the same copy editor, and thank goodness. So she has less familiarizing to do, but she still has to go back and read the books before right as she's getting into it. And they do have some documentation. They have like a style guide. So when she pointed out, for example, in the 2nd book that I had named 2 minor characters the same thing, like if I had a series. At that point, I didn't have a series Bible. I do now have a series Bible. But at that point I didn't. And if I had just gone through and marked it, I would have realized, oh yeah, there's two different women named Aleph who are completely unrelated to each other. And so I fixed that. But now I have that, and now I have the document where even if I'm naming a new character, now I will go back and look at the list of old characters just to make sure that I'm not naming somebody something too similar to, because I think at one point I had a character, I had a man named Ever in the first book, and then I wanted to name somebody Enver in the second book. And I'm like, I can't do that because to me, they're completely different names, but, and like Ever isn't a character in the second book, but it would be too confusing for them to I don't want to ask my readers to follow quite that much because I'm already asking quite a lot of my readers. I understand.
Well, I love the cast list at the beginning of Arca. That there was one at the beginning of Scorpica too, right?
We didn't get it in time for the hardcover. We put it in for the paperback, and I definitely had people writing me emails and saying, could you please, in the next one, put a list of characters because I can't keep track of all these people. And I completely respect that.
And I love having the cast of characters. I did that for my last book because I had so many family members that I had to keep track of. And it was so hard to keep track of it all that I had my own list. And when I sent the book to my editor, I was like, here, I needed this list. I'm sure you're going to need this list too. It's just like, you know what? If you and I both need this list, our readers are going to need the list. And so she made sure to have it included in the book, because sometimes when we want to do like these grand books with these lots of characters, we need to have the list there, especially if you have a family that you're having to deal with.
Yeah. And you guys remember the Arctic Fury, like there are 13 point of view characters in the Arctic Fury, and that one had a list in the front. It's like, okay, which one is the cartographer? Which one is the wife of the trapper? Like, in order to keep track of who's on the expedition and who's dying off at any particular point in the expedition. Like, it was really handy. Like, some stories just require it, right?
Oh, and I just
feel
that reminds me of the 13 characters. It just reminds me, I still have like PTSD because I did a book with 3 different perspectives, and I can't imagine doing 13 different ones. I just PTSD all over.
That's like when you see a cast of characters and you open a book and you sit down to start reading it and you see a cast of characters, like this is a book that you have to read when you're paying attention. Like, don't read it late at night if you start getting tired. I'm not a night reader. As if I read at night, I'm 2 pages in and I'm ready to fall asleep. Yeah. So there are just certain books that need to be read in daylight, for me at least. Otherwise I'll read it the next day going, what happened? What is going on? Who are these people? So, and I also had a question. I know we're talking a lot about the editing process, but I saw a post that you made on Instagram of several rows of Post-its.
Oh yeah.
And we might have asked you about this before, but I was very curious about your Post-it process.
Yeah, I absolutely have to, like, there are all these different forms of technology, right, that you can use to like move your outline around. I use Scrivener, as you may know, for part of organizing my outline, but there's a point in the process where I just have to take it and put it on paper, and I have to do my outline on Post-it notes. So in this case, it's funny because we talked about the 3 points of view and the 13 points of view, and I don't even know how many points of view I have in the book that I'm working on right now, excuse me, but there are a certain number of plot lines, and so I'm color coding it based on, it doesn't matter who's narrating a specific scene, but that scene is going to be part of a particular plot arc. And so that's the green arc, and then there's the blue arc, and there's the pink arc, and there's the orange arc, and all that stuff. So I was able to take all of the different scenes, and it's not by chapter, it's by scene, because I might have one scene in a chapter, I might have 3 scenes in a chapter. It just sort of depends on how long they are and who's talking about them and whatnot. So I had maybe 45 scenes in the book that I'm working on right now, divided into 5 different colors. And I put them all up on the wall that you saw on Instagram. And I realized that there were maybe 15 or 20 Post-it notes in a row with no yellow. So there was a bunch of yellow, and then there were a ton of other Post-it notes, and there was no yellow at all in several rows. I'm like, oh, shoot, I have left those characters too long without telling the reader what's going on with them. So I was able to fix it and move it around and accommodate it. But I had been working on the book for, gosh, over a year at that point, and not really realized, oh, okay, I need to touch those characters. I need to tell people what's going on with these characters. So some of that just doesn't come clear until I've color coded it and looked at it as blocks of color instead of chapters.
And I love the color coding strategy. And I know in Scrivener, they have the color coding aspect of it, which I recently discovered, and I cannot wait to start using myself when I start doing it, because Scrivener is really a wonderful tool for drafting.
It's great. That's great.
Oh.
Yeah, but then the way that I've broken it out is like my Scrivener, I've focused down too tight in order to see it. Like, I'm sure there is a way. Like, Scrivener is just very complicated, right? So I'm sure there probably is a way for me to depict it all on one screen, but I haven't figured out what it is.
I know. I feel like I'm scratching the surface with what Scrivener can do and how I use it, but it works for me. I kind of get to the point where if I pulled my last book out of Scrivener, I feel like too fast. And so when I start changing around chapters and stuff in Word, I get really annoyed, because I prefer Scrivener so much when it comes to drafting.
Mhm.
And this episode of Blind Window Words is brought to you by Scrivener.
It's very inexpensive too.
But there is something so satisfying about seeing the rows of Post-its. Like, that just made my little heart so happy.
It's meaningful. And then I pick them up and I move them around, and I'm staring at the wall, and I'm like, this one needs to go here, to go here. And then I don't know if you saw the post also, my daughter, who's 8, saw the Post-it notes on the wall, and she started writing like little encouragements on her own Post-its and putting her Post-its underneath my Post-its. And it's like the best thing. So now I go down there and I look at the wall of Post-its, and then there's a little like, love you, Mamo, like stuff.
Oh,
It's adorable.
An extra level of enjoyment. Need all the encouragement we can get, honestly, right?
That is true.
so when Arca opens and you're getting to know the new characters, the new queendom that you're in for book 2, I mean, it's a completely different setting and different environment than book 1 was. Of course, it's an entirely different queendom. How did you approach the world building and the story for this? Did you kind of approach it as if it were a standalone, with, of course, with the knowledge that there were going to be plot lines converging from or crossing over from book 1, or did you carry some of the world building that you created from the first book into the second one? That was a really long question.
No,
that is not how I wrote it.
Totally makes sense. I actually, the thing that's been really great about writing a series is that I am such a sloppy writer who figures things out as I go along. And when I wrote the first draft of the first book, I actually had plot lines happening in all 5 queendoms. And if you've read Scorpica, you know that it doesn't have plot lines happening in all 5 queendoms. So there were actually a bunch of characters and a bunch of plots and a bunch of events and a bunch of descriptions that I had written in the first book that I had to take out. So when I started building the second book, a lot of building that beginning part of the second book was stuff that didn't make it into the first book.
Oh.
So the scheming Senator Stellari, who we get to find out a lot about in the beginning of the second book, actually had been a character in the first book who I had to take out because there wasn't room for her. Because as big as that book was and as sprawling as it was, the first couple of drafts I did of it were too big, and I was asking the reader to keep track of too much. So I had to trim several plot lines and several characters. But I really wanted to I had ideas about what I wanted to do with this particular senator and what happens to her. And it worked out that I could move her to this different timeline, and still sort of use her in the ways that, spoilers, that I wanted to use her.
So in a way, we're getting to see the deleted scenes from Scorpica by reading Arca.
In a lot of ways, yeah. And then in book 3, there's even more of that. Again, no spoilers.
Dot.
Exactly.
And speaking of Stellari, I love that you use the word scheming to describe her, because I wrote the word, I said maybe a little devious for her, because she has plans and she is going to see them through. But one thing that really has always stood out to me, but just meeting Stellari, you're immediately pulled into her character. From reading the first few pages, what she's about, and you don't know what's going to happen to her, obviously, but she is so well formed. She's so fleshed out as a character. Is that, now knowing what we know, that she was in the first book, in the first couple of drafts, is that part of what was so easy to pull her into book 2 fully formed, or do you have a process for creating your characters?
I think it was, I definitely had a lot to draw on from what I had to cut out of book 1, but I think each of the characters that I'm talking about in the 5 Queendoms, this is the great thing about the big cast, is I'm so interested in all of the different forms of feminine power in this world. And so I've had, from Scorpica, there's sort of the military way of approaching things, and there's the super caring and nurturing and loving way of doing things. And so as we get into the second book, now we're looking at political power and legislative power and laws, and who gets to vote and who doesn't get to vote. And that's certainly something that is still very relevant today. And then the third book gets a little more into religious power. So it's partly that I want these women to be types of women, and then I also want them to be realistic examples of, okay, if this woman has this particular type of power, what kind of person does she have to be in order to be in that position? And then what does that position make her after she lives within that world for a while? What happens to a person who is working on those levels?
Well, there's definitely, you really hit the ground running with Arca. With Arca, you definitely hit the ground running. With Scorpica as well, it was just a completely different setting, and I just got sucked in from this with Stellari. I just loved reading her.
Awesome.
And so I know we just talked about how liberating it must be to write fantasy after historical fiction, with your wall of Post-it notes and series Bible. But what is something that you've learned from writing a series and writing a fantasy series that you maybe weren't expecting to take away when you first started?
It's interesting, and I love it. I am also looking forward to writing a standalone again, where I don't have to worry about the big picture. And it's also just easier to talk to readers about a standalone and say, hey, I can sell you on this book. Like, here's this book. And when I'm talking to somebody about the second book in a series, if they haven't read the first one, I'm like, well, you need to read that one.
Mhm.
Third one's going to be even worse. I'm like, well, if you haven't read either of the first two, and I'd like to say you could read the second one without reading the first one, and I'm sure you can. But when I look at other people's reviews, they're like, yeah, it's going to be a lot better if you've read the first one. And I am trying to build on something. And so I'm building that, it's a pyramid. And so you can see the later part without seeing the earlier part, but it's going to have so much more meaning if you've seen the earlier part. So that's what I'm sort of looking forward to, writing standalones. Just being able to talk about a book, and it's a book, and here it is. You start at the beginning, you stop at the end, and then you're done.
And just one wall of Post-its versus 5 walls of Post-its.
Several walls of Post-its in different houses over the course of multiple years. That was the thing, because we've moved into a new house since the last time I did this. And I'm like, where is the wall? Where is the wall that I can do this? Because my closet, it's a different closet. I don't have, So now I'm doing it in the library, in my downstairs library, instead of my closet upstairs. So it's a little different.
So I mean, you've basically already answered our pantser versus plotter questions. I don't even know if we really need to.
We haven't. See, we only did a one half because
okay.
we understand that you are a plotter, and so we have you down for
Have
that.
you I don't know if we've even talked about our super scientific study that we're doing.
No, because I think we started after the last time we had Greer.
Yes, I think. Okay, Diana, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, Michelle. So Michelle and I noticed I'm very much a plotter. I like to have everything plotted out, and I understand, as you and I have discussed, you have your path that you go on, and sometimes you stray, but you have this touchstone that you can come back to. In my life, in my everyday life, I'm okay with chaos. Chaos happens. Chaos is good. For those of you who play D&D, I consider myself chaotic neutral. Now, in Michelle's world, she writes fantasy, so we'll clarify that, and she likes to just, when she shows up, she's as surprised as a reader would be reading it for the first time, just writing it all out. However, she likes to have, there's a place for everything and everything in its place in her world. So now, since you've already answered the first half of the question, our question is, are you okay with chaos like me, or do you like to have everything all nice and neatly organized in your world?
I am in terms of D&D, I am a lawful neutral type person. I like to have order in my life. But in my writing, I just can't. I try to put strictures around it, and I try to organize it, and then stuff just happens. I cannot make the words do what I want them to do. Which is just funny to me because I'm so organized in all other aspects of my life. But I write the outlines, I write the books, and then somehow halfway through the book always has better ideas about what it should become as I am writing it. So I end up discarding a lot of words, which is why I'm so excited about this whole series idea, is I get to use those words, or at least some of them in future books. But yeah, the plotter versus pantser thing, I'm a plotter or a panter or something, because I want to be one or the other, and I end up being some weird hybrid of both.
But I feel like, so when it comes to I think nobody is truly one or the other completely. Like, as much as I like to plan things out, I'm willing to allow some of that chaos to come into the writing and be like, oh, this is a new character that just popped up today. This is interesting. It's going to completely throw off my plans for this book, but that's okay. Let's see where this goes. And that's okay. I think that's part of the writing process. But I feel like there's also the extremes, because we like to think, as humans, we like to think of things as being black and white, but there's so many shades of gray in our world. And so I feel like plotting gets a bad rap and pantsing, I think, also in some ways gets its own bad rap for having to be just completely, I'm just going to show up and whatever happens, happens. But there are times where where we've talked to pantsers about this before, and they have some little bit of sense of what they want to do. They know the beginning, they know the ending, and then everything else is going to be a fun ride. And that's okay. It's, that nice middle gray area. And I'll get off my soapbox.
Oh, but I like that way of thinking about it, like let the chaos in. Like, do you let the chaos in or do you not let the chaos in? I let the chaos in, if you think of it that way, yeah.
And I feel like, and letting the chaos in and going along that point, sometimes you just need to go where the story tells you where it needs to go. You can't force it. There was that movie, Stranger Than Fiction, which I love that movie. And the whole premise of that movie is you've got to follow the book where it takes you. And then what are you going to do when you're faced with this reality that your character could actually be alive and you're affecting the character? So it's a very interesting idea and concept of it.
Now I'm over here going, I have to take that quiz to find out what I am in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, so I can.
All the cool kids are doing it, Michelle.
I don't even play Dungeons and Dragons, but I am around enough people who do, and I know my personality type. And for the longest time, I thought I was chaotic good. However, I have met somebody she is truly chaotic good, and I'm like, you know what? I am not that much chaos. So I feel like I'm more chaotic neutral because I know I am not chaotic evil. I might have my days, but I know I'm not chaotic evil.
So is there, you said next April for book 3. So officially 1 year out. So yeah, we need to start planning our trip and get everything together, because after 8 years now, 8 years of the podcast, you're our first 5-time visiting author. Yeah, we'll have to come up with a better title than that.
5-member club. 5-member club? I don't know if that's necessarily it, but I feel like we're now going to have to up it. We're going to have to up it to 10.
Because you don't have other people now. You've probably got a few people like hot on my heels of,
Heather Webb's she's
Heather Webb.
Yeah, there are a few.
Yeah, she's number 4. So I feel like we get her in. See, we go up to the East Coast, Michelle. We get her in for number 5, and we can hit 2 birds, 1 stone, because we can make that drive from Boston to Connecticut.
She's not that far, so yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, there's we're excellent planners. We have a plotter who can plan out the trip.
Michelle is just a little wonky.
We'll figure it out. We'll make it work. But for readers who have not read either book, actually Scorpica is in our bookshop as well. So you can click on our link to our bookshop on bookshop.org to order Scorpica and Arca from the bookshop. As always, bookshop.org supports our wonderful writers. It does support the podcast, but most importantly, it supports all the wonderful indie bookstores out there. And April 29th is Independent Bookstore Day. I just zoomed out. I didn't know my tablet could do that. I think April 29th is Independent Bookstore Day. So sounds like a great excuse to go out and buy books that day and every day this month.
Any excuse.
Any excuse. You don't need an excuse.
Support your local independent bookstores.
But Greer, thank you so much. We always love having you here and letting us, pick your brain about Post-its and editing and creating these epic worlds that you've written about. So thank you so much.
It's always a good time. Thanks for having me. 5 times.
5 times.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks, you too.
Sorry, I have to go on the recording.
Diana, you have to stop it.
I'm enjoying it.